we're just off the back of a brilliant and inspirational conversation with Chris Recchia the other day, which hopefully you've listened to. If you've not, please go back and give it a listen. Even got Phil Murphy up at 5:20 this morning to get his bike ride done. Zero excuses, and filled me with some great motivation as well, isn't that right, Phil?
Yeah, I've got to say, the last 2 days after I read a little bit of background before the podcast from Chris that he provided us. This is the podcast on mental strength and resilience from last week, and I during a bike test I was doing a couple of days ago, it got me through because I was able to like separate some of my thoughts in the moment, but also, just getting up for a 6:15 meet for a long ride this morning. Yeah, I absolutely was, I literally just went, get up, don't delay, get up, get on with it, because if you want it, you'll go after it. And, I think Chris's story will resonate with a lot of people. So yeah, it was an excellent podcast. I think after the podcast you've had, you probably had some other thoughts as we were talking in the podcast, but there was an interesting one you relayed to me by message earlier.
Yeah, something that I guess I give a little bit of thought, and it's probably not Chris's story, and kind of not what made him into the success that he's managed to be. Just like that, I hope we did get that story across well, because it was really interesting. It was really interesting reading. It was really interesting speaking to him. But it was more, the message always tends to be to push through, to go hard, to continue regardless. And the way that I guess I've developed looking at it is almost in like three layers. You've got the kind of first layer, which is to get going, which, a lot of people struggle with that first step, and that requires mental toughness, it requires mental strength. And then that becomes easy. And then you've got the next level up, which is to keep going, which we essentially spoke a lot about on the previous podcast. And I would argue for some people that step then becomes quite easy as well. And it almost becomes the safe option, just to blindly carry on. And then for me, I think there's a third level to that. And it's being able to make those nuanced decisions of when to stop, when is enough, when do I need to kind of double down and push through. That's the stage that I think should be aspirational. It was quite a challenging place to get to, but it was just one of those thoughts that I kind of stirred up during a conversation yesterday.
Yeah, I think where you're going with that third step, I think the aspirational bit is when you can master that step, you truly know yourself, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's just a real deep understanding of yourself, where you're heading, what the trajectory is, how you're going to deal. Let's say that is not to push through in a situation that would lead to, long-term injury, and just to get an Ironman finisher's medal or something like that. It's being mature enough to step back and understand the longer term process and stuff, isn't it? So yeah, you're probably right. That's it would have been interesting to ask him that. In fact, I'll see him on the course at Bolton this weekend, so I will make sure to ask him the question, and maybe we'll come back with the answer on the next show after this. And Bolton leads me on to, we're heading into a big weekend of racing this weekend, especially for total triathletes. Bolton is, we're always very proud to put a fairly big team out at Ironman 70.3 and Ironman races, but I think this weekend might be the biggest team we've ever put out anywhere, and I'm looking forward to going up and just seeing it, such a positive sense of community within the team, athletes at all ends of the fit, those right at the pointy end and those doing their first race, and seeing how well it gels together, and all the support from all the coaches. I think there'll be a big coaching presence there as well. So looking exciting, as well as, plenty of other races going on. I know this is the last weekend of qualification for 70.3 Worlds this weekend. So Sardinia on this weekend, 70.3 Switzerland on this weekend. And there's probably others I've missed, but they're the ones I've got athletes at. So yeah, be an exciting weekend.
There's been a real buzz around Total Try, I think, this year, with regards to the kind of whole community side of it. I think certainly my feeling is there's been a big step up in cohesiveness and, trying to push on. And if that is your your thing, and you kind of want to be a part of that. I think this year has definitely been the best that I've seen it, and definitely the time to get involved with it. How many athletes do we have at Bolton then? What's the numbers? What's scoring the doors?
I don't actually know, but
Just big.
well, look, I'm looking at the size of the WhatsApp group, expecting there's a few coaches in there that aren't racing, and would say we're well north of 50. Maybe 60 odd. So yeah, it's exciting. And you're right, the community. Look, I think the whole sport of triathlon and endurance sport is so much more than performance these days. It's look, we've known for 20 years each that this is a lifestyle. You absolutely buy into it for every waking moment of your life. And I saw a good post actually from Tom Garbett, actually, one of our coaches the other day, and I can't quite remember what it said. It was just basically along the lines of like, I'm not apologizing to anyone for being so into what I'm into. This is my life. This is what I do. And a lot of people are. But then to build out such a social element, so much fun and enjoyment. And I've probably said a million times on this podcast that when you get to the end of it all, it's the experiences and the people you remember. And maybe actually after the podcast last week, the lessons you learn from, failure and success, they all build out the life. So and I think I said in that podcast, I believe that sport is a vehicle for life, and I think this weekend will be very exciting to see it. So and look, yeah, I think it's gone up a level this year. I think we've got some, as you well know, there's some very, very good people involved in leading that community now, and we're very lucky to have them, and they're doing a fantastic job. If you're listening, well done. Go buy your coffee on Sunday. So, yeah, look, and obviously, what comes after a big event is going to be the main subject of today's podcast.
Before we get into that, I'm going to pause you there because there was
Go
another
on.
interesting post that I read on social media just when you were saying about not apologizing. This is a thing that I love to do and I want to do a lot of it. And, we've obviously been a part of the sport for a long time. And it was, the post was talking about a recent study into addiction in sport, and being addicted to sport, and apparently
No,
triathlon
no, no,
rank
no, no, no.
higher.
No one listening to this is addicted to sport. It's fine.
But maybe that's a topic for another podcast. I thought it was quite interesting and not surprising at all.
I'm trying to think. I saw that. Who wrote that post? I saw that.
It
Was it
was Endure
Steve
IQ.
Magnus? It was who? Sorry.
Endure IQ.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah. I remember it. Yeah. Yeah. It's Yeah. Look, again, circle back to last week's podcast there, and um, your mental strength and resilience being impacted by those around you, and talk about Tom doing a post that resonated with like the people around you, the things they say, their actions they take, the way they carry themselves, they all have a big impact on how you are. So yeah, I think when people come on board for coaching, and they had this conversation with an athlete the other day about, I don't have a magic solution, as in I don't have a magic training plan that's absolutely guaranteed to be better than another coach's. There's some good coaches out there. It's the combination of the relationship between the coach and the athlete, the environment the athlete can find themselves in, as well as the training plan, the races, the mental strategy, a lot goes into it. And I'm a real big believer in environment. I hope, for our athletes and athletes of other clubs and stuff that are building out, good communities, that athletes realize that, their coaching extends much further than what's in Training Peaks. We're massively trying to encourage them into a situation that enhances training. And you and I both have come from backgrounds that, I lived in Shropshire for quite a lot of time. I was from Chester originally, and the standard around the Cheshire area, Cheshire, Liverpool, South Manchester, of triathletes was phenomenal. And I do believe it came down to success breeds success. People were pushing each other on. And I actually moved my business at the time back to Chester I could have gone several ways, and I looked at the situation around sport and went, well, that is one of my options, is to move the business there. And that's where I want to be. And it was the right move. It sounds extreme, move your business, move house, to be near the right environment. But, I didn't do it at the risk of anything. I did it for the right reasons. But, you will be the same. I know you went off to France for quite a good period of your, a period that was very good for you in your career and stuff, wasn't it? And in some ways, not everybody has that flexibility with kids and jobs and careers and stuff, but, by having some environment around you, it is so positive, hey?
100%. And, we can manufacture those environments as well. Like, it doesn't need to be, yes, maybe the perfect solution is that you upfront your life and you move to where the environment is, but you can create that. You can get a good coach around you. You can get a good community, as we've been kind of shouting about around you, that, can encourage you, hold you accountable, and kind of push you on. And there's good athletes everywhere now. Triathlon is no longer a little small sport where you say you're a triathlete and nobody knows another one. Most places you go, there'll be some strong athletes around that you can connect with. I guess something that you just mentioned earlier about coaching, and this will hopefully lead us on to the kind of topic of the day. But I think one of the worries around or from a lot of coaches right now is AI and the disruption that that'll cause. I mean, listen, I'm sure it's a worry for much more than coaches.
Taken us about 26 episodes to let the AI conversation come into this podcast, but here we are. Let's go.
I'll keep it brief. It was a thought that I actually had the other day, and not necessarily a new thought, but just solidified a little bit more in my mind. And something that you just said there about, coaching is much more than a training plan. In a lot of ways, the training plan is and should be such a small part of coaching, right? It's not really coaching. It's it's writing a plan, it's writing something to follow, but the coaching happens before and after that. In the conversations, getting somebody to do something because, and then understanding why, and having that conversation as to how to do it differently, do it better next time, and understanding the person and all the nuance and everything else that goes around it. That'll never change. That is human interaction, right? That is a very, very human thing, and I think our jobs are safe for a while,
No,
is what
look,
I'm
I
saying.
do it. A lot. You and I are the first to admit. I do use AI. For streamlining of work processes and things like that in my everyday job. I mean, what business isn't? In terms of, I mean, scripting this podcast, we come up with the ideas. And give it all our brain into. But if I want a script writing, it's a lot quicker to get an AI tool to just put it in a neat format that I can email to you. It doesn't mean you haven't done the work in the first place. I think with the whole what coaching is, you're right. I don't know about you. When I sit and write a training plan, I think of athlete X right now, and as I go to write their plan, it's all of the interaction I've had with this person some of it on even just the way they look, the way they respond, the way their body language is, whatever. And you've built this picture of this person that you're right, only humans can understand, certainly for now. And uh, your thought process is influenced on when you're writing that plan for that individual. Now, a physiology based plan, I mean, there's there's an optimal way to do it, but when you then bring in the psychological side of it and the life side of it, it's you can take an athlete's physiology, but then you also need to think about how other aspects of them work. So yeah, it's and look, just flicking back to that community thing quickly. One of the interesting things again with coaching is our job. At the moment we've built a community, we have lots of things on, we have lots of support for our athletes. Ultimately with coaching, your job isn't to handhold and be in total control. In a way, it's to show people how to stand on their own 2 feet and be very self-reliant, and to some degree let them lead the process when they're experienced enough. Now, I think community is the same, environment is the same. How do athletes create their own environment? We're only leading by example here. I look at our London group at the moment, and it seems very easy to get athletes of the higher standards together to do the training, but it's those newer to the sport, those that are coming through, that maybe aren't as confident at just showing up to sessions. So less of them show up, but then there's less cohesion of athletes at that level. And what I'm saying to them in London today is, guys, what I need is, those of you that might think, oh, this is a bit hard for me, you all need to show up to form a development group at the bottom. And that is on you, like we're, and then you'll get to know each other, and then you'll all train together, and you don't need me to do this for you anymore. And that's like one of the successes in coaching is when you make yourself obsolete because you've showed someone the way, and you're not. You then show them the next thing, and that's the job, right?
100%. And it's an evolution of how you work with people, and you always work with how many tools can you have in your locker, and how many different ways can you work with a multitude of different people from your beginners up until those that have been doing it for years at a good level. I just started coaching somebody, interestingly enough, that wanted to write their own training plan and writes it every week, and we review it and we decide, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How do we progress it? And it's a lot more of a kind of a back and forth rather than how most coaching relationships start. It's a little bit more authoritarian, where this is the plan, this is why you're doing it, X, Y, Z, because you've got a limited amount of knowledge, and then as that knowledge grows, that evolves, and it should become more of a conversation.
I think that's great. I have had that with athletes before in the past, and I think it's another great learning tool. Anyway,
And
your nice neat segue into today's conversation, which I then took off on a whole tangent, falling apart. Shall we dive into today's podcast? Look, it's time. I think June is a moment where a lot of people have trained very hard all winter. They put a lot in. Let's not go into whether or not people are too fit too soon. Back in December, January time. Anyway, but look, they've put a lot of effort in over the winter, and a lot of people have a big race in May or early June, and they've trained very hard for it. They've had build-up races, and they, have probably accumulated like a lot of fitness, a lot of mental fatigue, probably a lot of sacrifice in life. And I always think not just recovery from the race, but actually a little bit on top of that to take a step back. It's a long season in triathlon these days. We've got athletes racing right through to December, but championship season, September, October time, you can't hold a peak all year, and if you've sort of put it all in now, taking a little step backwards to then take steps forward, I think is quite good. And when this is different to an end of season break, but a mid season break is what we're going to talk about. So I think you've obviously been having some conversations yourself, Grant, with athletes on this exact subject.
yeah, and I think it's in some ways quite a nuanced topic, where for some athletes I think it works very well, in particular if you have been training well all year, if you've been on it since, I mean, it wouldn't be uncommon for athletes to be on it since October last year. Slow build up, that's what, 8 months, 9 months of solid training, right? And you've just done your first few races, they've gone good, bad, and different. There's a hefty load of fatigue there, and sometimes it can be quite a challenge to keep that going for another few months. And often the challenge is that you don't feel like you need it because you're energized. I mean, we've just had 2 good weeks of awesome weather. People have been outside, they've been enjoying stuff, they've been racing. That's lifted spirits. It's made people excited about the triathlon again after the long, hard winter. And so to take the break now can often feel like um, quite a challenge, quite a difficult thing. It doesn't feel like you need it now. And then you've got other athletes, and this was kind of the conversation that I was having, where actually, I mean, training is the release, right? Training is the thing they do to de-stress. Maybe they're not pushing to top levels. Maybe they have had the odd week or the odd weekend of disruption because of work, because of family, because of illness, because of whatever that is. And actually taking a break when the weather's good, when things are finally falling into place, maybe wouldn't be a good idea. I don't think it's a blanket statement for everybody to take a week off.
No, I agree. And the timing of this, it could be June, it could be July, it could be May, it could be not at all. It could be someone is going to do an Ironman in early August, and that's them done for the year. And of course, this is. I think I'm just floating. We're floating an idea here, aren't we? A theoretical idea as to why you might take one. So maybe I'll just be a little bit indulgent here and just talk about myself. I've just had a break. I've just had pretty much 2 weeks. I'm obviously gravel racing at the moment, not doing triathlon, but I think the length of the race is comparable. Got on it with training. mid-December, for the first big challenge in on the 3rd of May. So yeah, fairly big build. I think the winter was tough. Also had a bit of sickness through February, so I missed a bit, bobbled along, pulled it back around with some training camps, and got to the first race. Now the first race is 13 hours. Of hard racing. You are obviously massively fatigued after it. So I'd obviously had a fairly good taper into that race. I probably came off the gas 10 days before, and freshened up. And I had another race 2 weeks after that, for 4-ish hours, so a bit more intensity, but pretty taxing. And look, it took me the 2 weeks in between of doing not an awful lot to come round from that first race, and I just about came round. I performed fairly well. I think I'd have performed better without the 13 race hour first. But I guess if I had a 10-day taper, I had a massive race, put a load of fatigue in me. I then had 2 weeks, and look, we get athletes who'll do 270.3s 2 weeks apart. This could be similar to some people who just had a block of racing. I had 2 weeks of, again, not doing an awful lot of training, just trying to bring myself back round. I then raced, was fatigued again all week. I was actually going to do a third race the following week, which I knocked on the head for more for just a decision of starting my break a bit early, and the amount of fatigue I was carrying. So if you actually add back there, I've been in a block of racing. I haven't really done any productive training other than the 2 races for 4 or 5 weeks. Fitness on Training Peaks was falling because I wasn't in my normal sort of highish volume routine. I gathered a load of fatigue. I look at my next races and go, I've got another big block of racing in August. Doesn't mean I won't race through June and July, but it just means that I made a decision to have a holiday. And actually, as you said, period of good weather, timed nicely. Okay, I wasn't out riding my bike, but I did have a nice holiday in some good weather, and and stepped away. And I didn't not exercise. Went for a bit of a touristy bike ride one day. I think maybe by day 10, I did some very moderate big gear reps, just up and down a hill because I only had an hour. We were leaving the campsite we were staying on, and it was just convenient. I wasn't really overthinking what I was doing. I just wanted to move. And yeah, had 10 to 14 days off it really. And if I look at my metrics, of course, I've dropped 20 to 25 CTL in that time, from the peak before the first race to probably 30 CTL, which is really hard for athletes to deal with. They've spent all this time building this CTL to see it start to fall away. We know CTL is only representative of a 42-day rolling average anyway. So you might have taken 8 months building it up, but it's only representative of what you did in the last month and a half anyway. So all you're doing by doing it over longer is controlling the ramp rate. So, and look, I guess one of the first things here is, I'm very long in the tooth. I've been doing this a long time. I understand I felt the benefit of end of season breaks, mid season breaks, coming off the gas, many times. I'm still here 30 years later doing this stuff. And I probably put it down to being able to step away once, twice a year. So, and the biggest thing it's given me coming back is like, I am high, okay, I joke about Chris Reckier speech getting me out of bed this morning. I'm hyper motivated. I got to last Saturday, I was ready to go again. I'm not sure the legs were actually ready to go again, actually. But, the brain certainly was, and the legs have come back online. And, yeah, my CTL's down. My threshold, I've mentioned I use lactate and stuff. I've lost a considerable bit. I know because I tested it on Saturday, but I think what athletes forget is it comes back quickly. Yeah, you're going to drop a bit. I've probably put a bit of weight on. I was on holiday. I was enjoying myself, but I'm 12 to 14 weeks from the next big races that matter. I will have the weight back to where I want it. I will have the CTL hopefully back to higher than I had it. I actually think I fell a bit short because of that illness in February, and I'm trying to put the body in a healthy place to get going again. So, yeah, I guess I'm just sort of like trying to illustrate the point here that don't be scared by numbers and metrics and stepping away, and also don't think you have to do nothing, but don't be thinking about getting fitter. Don't be thinking about chasing TSS. Be a little bit more relaxed in a break of whatever you choose, 7 days, 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on what you've been up to.
I think the longer that you do sport, the longer you do endurance sport, you often see the kind of longer break you need. The training is in the system. Your body's got a memory of these things, and it does come back super quick. Especially, if you've been off for a week, you're barely going to register it. I mean, you're going to take a few days, and then you'll feel completely back to normal. Fitness does not disappear as quickly as some of these algorithms suggest it does. One thing that I always see with age group athletes is the training drops away whenever there's work stress, whenever there's family or life stress. The training drops away. Or, conversely, the training picks up when there's a lack of other life stress. But they always carry this high level of stress, whether that's from training, life, whatever. And actually, having a mid season or an end to season break does is it takes hopefully all stress away. And I think that's an important point to consider. Don't plan your mid-season break when you've got a particularly busy work schedule, when you've got a lot of other stresses on, because you'll just come back and you'll be in the exact same fried mental situation. This is a tool to try and refresh, to try and trigger that motivation that Phil was speaking about, so that you feel like you want to do it, like you're ready to get up early in the morning, you're ready to go through the hard work again and trying to improve, trying to get fitter than you were before. But we need to carve it out as the relaxing time.
Do you have athletes that, I mean, I think the point you've made is brilliant. You have athletes that like, right, July's coming, I've got a family holiday for a week. Don't worry, coach, I can take my bike with me. I mean, what you're saying there, this is actually and I do this to people. If the timing is right, if the timing is right for a bit of a step back, I go just leave the bike at home. Just go and have a holiday. Like, yeah. And it is exactly what you said. I've actually probably never thought about it quite as concisely as you spelled it out there. But yeah, you're off work, you're having a nice time with your family, and actually you lower the training stress. You can stay active. Put your trainers in your bag, go for a little jog in the morning, enjoy a nice big fat breakfast afterwards. And another thing to just clear up as well, I sort of explained how much CTL I've dropped as well. I didn't drop that from my 2 week break. I dropped that from the 4 to 5 weeks of disrupted training through a race block. When you do a race block, you do lose fitness, and that at some point you have to stop racing and get back to training. It was the combination of both. So a week off is probably only going to do you good. Most people are so committed and always on it, and like you said, this always elevated stress level is huge. And why, one of the reasons the professionals get so good is that they're able to rest and recover properly and lower stress levels on a very regular basis. And it's not to say being a professional is unstressful. Being good at sport continuously to ensure you've got money coming in the door is probably incredibly stressful. But they build in on a regular basis what amateurs don't, and that is proper time to lower stress. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just another benefit of a mid-season break. What about like some of the physical benefits in terms of really allowing some deep recovery in the body, connective tissues, etc. Reducing the injury risk later in the season?
Yeah. I think that would be an interesting topic to ask somebody about, actually. Like, I've not really thought about it too much. But where my head goes, you think about tendons, for example, where sometimes a deload is just as bad as a increase in load
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with the kind of tolerance and how it responds. And so the actual coming back, you need to be a little bit careful if I mean, a week is nothing, right? But things like, bone turnover, some kind of deep muscle recovery, the nervous system, all these things, respond really, really well to that break. And I would imagine, doing some proper recovery time can only be a good thing, and getting some proper sleep as well. And, none of this surviving on 6 hours to get everything done in the day. Get your 8, 9, 10. Be like Alexander Croy. What's his name? God,
Craig Alexander.
Craig Alexander. Getting his nickname mixed up. That famously used to sleep 11 hours a day when he was in heavy training block.
Yeah, I think the issue will always come that we're dealing with highly motivated individuals. This is the reason we do a podcast on this. This is a really difficult thing for athletes. It's just not the way they're wired. And I think it's about just picking the right moment, that family holiday where it doesn't matter how you're wired, your other half's going to just, put their foot down and go, no, this is the way we're having a holiday, and forcing a situation, because they're probably, look, there's a lot of benefits to it, to stepping back. I think a week as well is, and that's not a week straight. I think there is a little bit of a difference. A week off the back of a 70.3, well, for most people, that's required anyway. We're talking about a little bit of extra recovery. Don't just think a week after a 70.3, that's your mid-season break done. That's normal. You're nearly probably going to extend it out from there if you're doing it straight off the back of a 70.3. And I always think going on holiday immediately after a big race is actually a really nice, clean way to do it. Fly within a day or two and get your holiday in. So look, okay, so you actually touched on a little bit of this with the whole taking time off might be as bad for your connective tissues and tendons and stuff, and ligaments, as overload. You've had a bit of a break, you've deloaded. When you come back into training, mid-season, September races, August races, whatever, talk a little bit about how you sort of see the return to training, what the next phase is for a lot of athletes.
I think as you said, it largely depends on what you've got coming up. If you've got races in July, for example, it's a lot different to if you have races in end of August, September. But it does give a little bit of an opportunity to revisit some of the stuff that you probably worked on earlier in the season. As we get into the race specific period, things like your VO2 max might decrease a little bit as you work a little bit more on the efficiency side of the equation. Now can be quite a nice time to start to get that back up, without the worry of being inefficient at your races. You can regalvanize some of the power, some of the strength, some of the um, aerobic power. Would you be in a
I'd
similar vein?
absolutely agree with it. I don't think you need the same length of phase that you might use in the winter on these. I think you can, move through the phase. I don't think you need week after week after week of hitting VO2. I think people are touching on it all the time anyway, within a well-built plan. It's never just to focus on one thing. We always hit all zones within each week and that kind of thing. But I think one of the key things is the first week back, it's not all guns blazing. Let the body come back in naturally. Don't shock it. You might have a touch of VO2 in there if you're about to do a couple of weeks VO2. The first sessions back don't need to be amazing. They can be completed. The body find its way back to a bit of intensity, especially like say you've come off the back of an Ironman, and whilst I would obviously say there is intensity, even up to race day with an Ironman build, I think it's a little bit different when you're doing like specific hard sessions. Be cautious with any fast running. You may not have got to those kind of run paces in a little while. Just go through the motions to get back into it. And then, yeah, absolutely agree. If you've got races further away, it is probably for a lot of middle and long distance athletes, that's classic reverse periodization type thing before you start heading back into race specific strength and race specific efficiency, which obviously you do need. But I would also say the other thing is don't go too extreme the wrong way. Yeah, there's a touch of higher intensity. You still need that durability layering in. Don't move too far away from everything you spent 6 months building. And if you do come back and you feel like you've lost a bit in the first few days back training, it probably is just the first few days of getting going again. I'm like 5 days back in and feel much better than I did 5 days ago in terms of where my numbers are, and think heart rate's settling. I think heart rate for power and stuff freaks people out a little bit, but like if like me, if you've had 2 weeks of not doing loads, your blood plasma drops a little bit, and heart rate will be a little bit out of alignment with things. And just go to RPE a little bit that first week back.
Yeah, I mean, heart rate. Sorry, heart rate's a terrible metric to use when you come back. As you said, blood plasma drops. Nervous system is recovered, so it's going to be substantially higher in most cases. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It just gives you different numbers. Thinking about then, the conversation with the athlete that feels motivated now. They've just hit their stride in training. They have done a couple of races that went well. Their big goals in August, September. They're like, right, I'm ready. It's June. I've got 2, 3 months to properly nail it now. And they don't feel tired. They feel energetic. They feel ready to go. How do you have that conversation to say, right, this is the time, have a rest?
Right. First, I'm just going to go off on a slight tangent here because you said, they don't feel tired. Well, something I've learned about athletes this year, apparently they're never tired. When we were on the camp in Calp earlier this year, I was there with, Chris was there, multiple 70.3 world champion. Jen was there, multiple 70.3 overall winner. I've obviously got a fairly big background, and we're all sat there going, I am absolutely shattered from this camp. And you ask an athlete, not one athlete ever said they were tired. No, no, I'm fine. I'm good. I'm all right. I'm like, so first of all, if an athlete says they're not tired, dig a bit deeper because there must be. I think their version of tired versus us that are longer in the tooth is a little bit different. But yeah, look, I think motivation. You get athletes on camp and they're highly motivated on that week or so on camp, and that motivation nearly psychologically overrides actually how they're feeling in terms of fatigue. Because funnily enough, a day or two after this, on the back end of camp, you could see athletes were getting it. You could see them in their performance. They were getting tired, but they still wouldn't admit they were tired. Anyway, how do you have the conversation? I mean, look, you raised a good point. The break isn't for everyone. I would look at some data. I'd look at the rest of the season trajectory. I'd look at the history with the athlete and try to understand how that person will be if we plow on. I would then, of course, try to educate them on maybe using the performance management chart, maybe showing them mistakes from the past, maybe showing them when it's done well. Hopefully, a lot of the athletes understand things like the performance management chart in Training Peaks to understand that to get to the place they want to be in terms of fitness, the trajectory needs to start at a certain point and the ramp rate needs to be right. I think trying to get athletes to understand it's part of the process. It's part of a cycle, and that what we're doing, it's very easy for athletes to understand the yearly cycle because it's calendar year, isn't it? But suddenly in the middle of the year, just because some ancient calendar that was created by, I don't know, I can't actually think who invented the modern calendar, but 2 or 3 thousand years ago dictates when it's okay to rest and not. It's actually more about understanding the cycle of performance. And then I think the one that always wins them over, really, once you've done all of that, is that you sell the idea of really being able to push on afterwards, and really building to something, a new level by the back end of the year, because we've sort of not talked about peaking too much, but I do really believe that you can't peak more than twice in a year, allowing for winter not being a race period. And for many, it's once. So pick your moment and time it well. And the best performances I always see come from great timing. So, and then the final thing I'd say is just don't blindly go, well, everyone's raced at Bolton this weekend. The mid-season break comes now. For others, if they've got kids, the summer holiday, early in the summer holidays might be when they go, first week of the kids' holiday is the most popular time for taking a break. And that could be it. It might just be randomly in the middle of a training block somewhere that we just step away. But if you again illustrate to, I sometimes use predicted TSS to sort of illustrate it's okay to build, then drop, then build again. You'll still end up where you need to be. So yeah, a few tips. What about yourself?
I think it's a very similar conversation. It's trying to get people to understand that they need to create space to get fit. They can't keep on hammering the same stuff over and over again, and getting unfit to a very, very small degree just creates that space to step into. It does. It makes it a lot easier to get fit. I think something that we spoke about earlier in the season, maybe in the podcast, maybe not, but I think it was Chris actually. He wrote an email about how his best year was on the back of being his least fit off of an injury or illness or something and not starting the year until March, April. And I would suggest, having been through similar stuff myself, it's because you create space to step into. You're not still just hammering the same thing over and over again. You give your body a kind of degree of freshness in there. Taking a little bit of a different scenario then, where the athlete has maybe had quite a turbulent time. They have maybe been a little bit injured, maybe been a little bit ill, they've maybe not had the races that they've wanted. Is it still a good idea to take a break?
Yeah, look, I had a year like this in 2022. I 2022. Yeah, 2022. My entire first 6 or 7 months of the year was written off with illnesses, injuries, just bad luck. 2022 turned out to be my most successful year ever. I really wasn't even like getting into my stride till July. I raced September, October, November. I won my age group 3 times on the bounce. Won some other local stuff in the meantime, and of course, no, I was going to say, of course, I struggled in the first part of the year. I didn't. I knew it's a long year. Do you know what I always go back to? It's a bit where I knew him growing up. Actually, I don't know him anymore, but I knew him a little bit through cycling. Steve Cummings, the professional cyclist, British guy, no longer a professional cyclist. I think he's director sportif for Ineos or someone now, isn't he? He um, during his professional career, I remember him breaking his leg early in the year. As a cyclist, a professional cyclist, breaking your leg is catastrophic. It was in the Spring Classics, and he went on to like win his first Grand Tour stages in the September at the Vuelta Tour of Spain. And so going from absolute catastrophe to the biggest moment of your career, and I don't know why it stuck out to me, but it forever reminded me that actually, as a committed athlete, especially when you've got a lot of skin in the game, sometimes that step back can lead to a really impressive bounce back. And I had a close friend of mine actually the other year, and I was sat with him after the Gravel World Champs 2 years ago, and I was saying to him, you could do with a break. He's a very, very fit 60-year-old, pushes, incredibly fit. It's ridiculous. And he was racing a lot and doing a lot. And I was like, you've not had a break for quite a long time. You could do it anyway. Lo and behold, he forgets he's pumped his tyres up to road pressure when he drives from Belgium to Spain in his motorhome, and he gets out and goes for a ride on the gravel and stacks it on the first corner, breaks his hip. So he's out the game for 14 weeks, the whole of autumn, well into January. And I was going bike packing with him in the March to Morocco. And he was worried he wouldn't even be fit enough to go on a casual bike packing trip. And, this is a 60-year-old guy who broke his hip and did nothing for 3 months. And the bounce back was incredible. But by the time I rode with him it was actually late February, so he'd only been riding 6 or 7 weeks or something. He wasn't far off where he'd been. And actually what happened onwards there is his level came back up to something I don't think I thought I'd see him get back to as he was getting into his 60s, having known him from his mid 50s. And he was a triathlete. I bumped into randomly a race in 2017, and I've become close with him. I think those experiences, I hope people can, my story there, the other two stories about those athletes, and even at the highest level, hopefully help people understand that if your first half of the season has, for want of a better word, gone to shit, I would still consider where you are. Have you been, if it's not been going well, but you've been pushing and digging, do you still need to step back before you go forward? What's the timeline? Just start your season again. The ability to still get something out of this year is not affected by what's gone on up to this point.
Yeah, yeah, I would largely agree. I would largely agree. The only scenario that I think it's maybe a bad idea was, I guess, mentioned a little bit at the start, but with athletes that, maybe don't take it quite so seriously, aren't really worried about performance peaks and troughs. They enjoy doing the thing in the most simplest terms, and actually riding your bike, running, swimming is your release. It's your getaway time. It's your enjoyment. And if that's you, then yeah, I don't think a break now is the good idea. I think the break is maybe further down the line when it's not so enjoyable anymore. The other point, just I guess to add to what you were saying, oftentimes if you are really, really fit, like your friend who is racing a lot was, probably teetering on that edge. It is an edge, and when you get up to those peaks, maybe this is the first peak of the year, it's actually a very dangerous place to be for all of us. As soon as you break into a new frontier of fitness, you are rolling the dice a little bit with injury, with illness, with come down. That's the most likely time that you're gonna face these things. Taking that break before it happens and getting less fit is often actually the solution, so that you don't end up in some kind of catastrophic situation, like, you're maybe not thinking straight like your friend, but even more so, just your tissues aren't quite ready for this new physiology system that you've developed, and injury ensues, or you're not conditioned enough to handle the load, and your immune system can't take it, and you get a little bit ill. So oftentimes it's a necessity almost from a performance perspective, not just for the mind, but for the body in order to step on again.
I think it's a really good point. I think your body can lag behind your fitness levels a little bit in terms of adaptation, and especially if you are progressing through the sport. Just I think you're talking from such experience there in terms of being able to see it from many years of doing it, understanding that real performance is playing the long game rather than, a lot of athletes can't think beyond the next race. They certainly can't really think beyond this year in terms of success, certainly at age group level. And I actually think it's a conversation that should be had more about what success is over 2 to 3 years, or even the long term. Where do you really want to get to? And that's a very different answer for, I'm not just talking about where do you want to get to in performance, but what does the whole sport mean to you? What do you want to get out of it? And how are we progressing towards that? And then you can start to see things exactly like you said there, where, based off current trajectory, do we need to take a step back whilst the body learns to tolerate the load, and you don't end up then with a failure that, we talked about failure in that other podcast and it being a vehicle of learning. But of course, we do want to avoid it, in general as well. So, or certainly, simple failure, like just picking an injury up for overcooking it. So, yeah, no, couldn't agree more.
Some lessons you've got to learn yourself, other lessons, feel free to learn them off of other people. Don't make the same stupid mistakes that everybody else has made 100 times, right?
It's what we're here for, just telling everyone our stupid mistakes. So, yeah. Look, I think that was a pretty good summary on quite a lot of topics there, actually, in the end. So, on to Bolton this weekend and other races, and we will catch up with you after this one.
Yeah, I mean, this will come out after Bolton, I think, for all those. Hope it has went well.
Depends how fast I'm working. Maybe we'll dump it out on Saturday night right ahead of the race.
Brilliant. Cool. Good to chat. Speak to you soon.